Hello everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy daily newspaper analysis. Today is 8th January 2025 and today we have some very important topics from different newspapers. So one by one we'll be discussing these topics. So the first topic is about India's progress in its climate change targets. We'll be understanding what are the targets of India with respect to climate change, what are its commitments under Paris Agreement, and how India has achieved progress so far on these commitments. And the next very important topic is about the removal procedure for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, and this is also very important from the exam point of view. So these are the two topics that we are going to discuss. So the first topic is about India's progress on climate change targets. Now, if we talk about this, now India is a country with world's largest population, and India is also the third largest emitter of the greenhouse gases, and India is also the third largest consumer of the fossil fuels. So at this point of time, India's energy security is very important, but the problem is that whatever energy that we have been utilizing, it is mostly from the fossil fuels, whether it is from the hydrocarbons or coal. So that is the main problem here. So how can we ensure energy security, economic growth, along with how can we meet the climate targets or the climate commitments? And so that is the main crux of this particular topic. So in this context, let's understand that India has nationally determined contributions, which are also known as NDCs. So NDCs are nationally determined contributions. So these nationally determined contributions exactly means that every country have certain climate commitments. For example, India, based on its capacities, it would contribute to the reduction of the climate change. For example, if India says that they are going to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by a certain percentage, so that is actually the nationally determined contribution. So every country would announce the nationally determined contributions. So India also have its own intended nationally determined contributions. So contributions actually means to what extent India will contribute to reduce climate change, reduce global warming or greenhouse gases. So that is the nationally determined contributions, and every country will have their own NDCs, and these NDCs are pledged under the Paris Agreement, right? So we all knew that during COP21 there was an agreement called the Paris Agreement. So this COP21 took place in the year 2015, and in this COP21 every country has agreed for the nationally determined contributions under Paris Agreement. So nationally determined contributions in the sense that climate change is now a reality. So greenhouse gases and the economic activity has been contributing for the generation of these greenhouse gases. So how countries would reduce the greenhouse gases, so how each country would contribute to reducing greenhouse gases, is what is called as the nationally determined contributions, right? However, the nationally determined contributions are common but a differentiated responsibility for every country. Why it is common but differentiated responsibility? Understand that here, take for example India. So India is not a developed country. India is underdeveloping country, and India is still developing its infrastructure and people still living in poverty. So therefore we can categorize India as a developing country, right? So on the other hand, take countries like France or US. So compared to India, these countries are developed. So these countries are developed, the standard of living of people is also very good, right? So therefore in this context, we have to understand the other thing. Those countries which are developed now, these countries are actually responsible for the present level of greenhouse gases emissions or climate change, right? For example, countries like US, UK, France, so they are already well developed countries. So well developed means, so they actually emitted a lot of greenhouse gases during their development process. Now they are well developed. However, the brunt is faced by the developing countries. Developing countries are not yet developed. They are developing. But it is not fair to impose the same responsibility on countries like India and US, right? So it is not fair and just to, for example, India and US having same responsibilities to dealing with climate change. No. So common but differentiated responsibilities means that both US and India will have the responsibility, but their responsibilities are different. For example, US would have more responsibility with respect to the dealing with or tackling climate change, and India will have a lesser responsibility. So this is what is called as common but differentiated responsibility, to recognize the distinction between the developed and the developing world, right? So however, in India the per capita emissions are very low compared to most of the developed countries, and even other developed countries also. The per capita emissions of greenhouse gases is very low. What exactly is this per capita emission of greenhouse gases? So per capita means how one individual is emitting greenhouse gases, right? So per capita actually means that you have to divide the total emissions with the total population, total emissions with the total population, and you get the per capita emissions. Now in India, the per capita emissions are significantly low compared to the developed countries like US, right? So therefore, this is another factor why we need to have common but differentiated responsibility. Common but differentiated responsibility. Per capita emissions in India are also very low, right? So as I've already told you that India is the third largest emitter of the greenhouse gases, despite being the per capita emissions are low, right? So even though, because India's population is 146 crore, and that's why India is the third largest emitter of the greenhouse gases, but even though it is the third largest emitter, so if you divide all the emissions by total population, the per capita emissions in India is very less compared to several other countries. So therefore there is a need for common but differentiated responsibility. However, over the last 1 decade, India has made measurable progress, right? So particularly dealing with the climate change, right? So we'll be understanding what are the measurable progress, what progress India has achieved so far on this front. Let's understand this. So India's key climate commitments under the Paris Agreement. So let's understand this as well, right? For example, under Paris Agreement, as I've already told you, it is also known as COP21 of the Paris Agreement. So it took place in the year 2015, and it is Paris Agreement. So under Paris Agreement, India has announced its nationally determined contributions, right? So I've told you what exactly is nationally determined contributions. So these are the contributions from Indian side to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, to reduce its impact on the climate change. Right. So let's understand what are the targets that India has announced. So India has announced that it will reduce the emission intensity of its GDP by 33 to 35% by 2030. So that means our economic activity will not generate too much of greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So our economic activity will make a transition towards green and sustainable fuels instead of using fossil fuels, because we all knew that fossil fuels are responsible for the greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions causes global warming, and global warming further responsible to climate change. For example, imagine economic activity where industries are actually powered by the renewable energy resources. It is actually powered by renewable energy resources. So if industries are using renewable energy resources, there will be zero emissions, right? So there will be zero emissions, and apart from that, there will be no greenhouse gas, no global warming, and then it will also contribute to lesser climate change as well. So that's how our GDP, so GDP means the total value of our goods and services produced in a year is GDP, right? So the emission intensity of our GDP will be reduced by 33 to 35% by using renewable fuels and other energy efficient methods. This is what the objective of it, right? So, and apart from that, we will achieve 40% of non-fossil fuel based installed power capacity. Now what exactly is this non-fossil fuel based installed power capacity? For example, we need to talk about the solar energy, wind energy, right, geothermal energy, and small scale hydro electricity. So these are all non-fossil fuel energy resources, right? So therefore what we do in the total energy basket, so around 40% of our energy, right? So 40% of our total energy will be produced from these non-fossil fuel energy resources by the year 2030, and later it will be further taken up to the 50% as well. And the fourth target is that we will install 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by the year 2022. Right, so I hope you know what exactly is a renewable energy. Again, solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, hydroelectricity, tidal energy. So all these are renewable energy. So we will achieve 175 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2022, and we'll take up this to 500 gigawatt by the year 2030. So this is also an ambitious target. And then create an additional forest and tree carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. So that exactly means that forests are actually known as the carbon sink. So why they are known as carbon sink? Why? Because we all knew that forests absorb carbon dioxide, they release oxygen. When forests absorb carbon dioxide, they store this carbon in their plant roots, they store it in trunk of the plant, so every part of the plant. So therefore we can say that forests are the carbon sink, right? So what we do, we will increase the forest cover. We'll go for large scale afforestation. Through this large scale afforestation, so we'll increase the forest cover. More forest means the carbon will also be absorbed by the increased forest cover. So in a similar way, by increasing the forest cover, so we'll create a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent by 2030. So these are India's climate commitments. However, during COP26, so COP21 is about the Paris Climate Agreement. But in COP26, Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced Panchamrit commitments. So the Panchamrit commitments consisting of 5 important targets or goals. Panch means 5. So Panchamrit commitments. Now, what exactly is this Panchamrit commitments? In this Panchamrit commitments, Prime Minister Narendra Modi held that we'll reach non-fossil fuel energy capacity of 500 gigawatt by the year 2030. The very same goal that earlier talked about, right? And then fulfill 50% of its energy requirements by renewable energy resources alone, right? For example, whatever energy that we have been using, so completely as a nation, so 50% of the energy would come from the renewable energy resources, and the total installed non-fossil fuel energy capacity would be 500 gigawatt. And then we will also reduce 1 billion carbon emission by 2030 and reduce carbon intensity of our economy by 45%. So earlier 33 to 35%, and that has been increased to 45%, and India will become net zero by the year 2070. So I hope you know what exactly is net zero. So net zero actually means the total amount of carbon emitted by a country in a year, the very same amount of carbon is absorbed additionally by forests or any other means. So this is what is considered as net zero emissions. So India will become net zero by the year 2070. And as of now, Bhutan is already considered as a net zero country, right? So let's understand the emission intensity reduction in India. So how the emissions in India have been reduced over a period of time. Now in India, emission intensity, I have earlier explained what exactly is this emission intensity. So emission intensity means an industry reducing the greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere using renewable energy resources or other energy efficient methods, which is considered as emission reduction in the emission intensity of an economy, of an industry, right? So India reduced its emission intensity by 36% by 2020. So in fact, it has increased, it has already surpassed this 2030 target, which was set a decade early, right? Because under COP21, we set a target that will reduce the emission intensity of our economy by 30 to 35% of our GDP by the year 2030. but in 2020 itself we have reduced our emission intensity of our economy by 36%. So therefore we have achieved this goal 10 years early, right? So apart from that, if you take all G20 countries, so India is also a member of G20. So G20 is the top 20 most advanced economy, most advanced economies. So top 20 economies in the world. So India is also a member of G20. Now if you take into account all the G20 countries, so it is the fastest intensity reduction among all these G20 countries. So G20 means top 20 economies in the world. It includes US, UK, France, China, Russia. So all these countries, India, right? So what are the key drivers of this reduction in emission intensity in India? So let's understand these key drivers as well. So key drivers are, so India has invested a lot in solar energy, wind energy, and other non-fossil fuel energy generation, right? So therefore this is one factor which has helped India generate the reduce its emission intensity substantially. Secondly, non-fossil fuel capacity has exceeded to 43% in the year 2023, and it has reached to 51% by 2025 June. So this is also a significant achievement on the part of India, right? Under Panchamrit commitments, so India has targeted that almost 50% of the total energy would be come from the non-fossil fuel energy resources by the year 2030. But in 2025 itself, India has achieved this target. And then if you look at the economy, Indian economy is dominated by the service sector. So this is another factor. So when Indian economy is dominated by the service sector, so service sector mostly comprising of services, IT, digital economy. So service sector is a less greenhouse gas or carbon emission generating sector. For example, sectors like cement, steel. So these are the sectors which comes under the industry or manufacturing. So industry or manufacturing generate highest amount of greenhouse gases or carbon emissions, but service sector on the other hand, IT, digital economy, services, they generate very less amount of emissions into the economy. Now I've told you that Indian economy is dominated by the service sector. Service sector is a less carbon intensive sector. So this is another factor which has contributed to reducing emission intensity in India. Right. So apart from that, India has also launched some energy efficiency measures. So what exactly is the energy efficiency measures? So energy efficiency means that whatever energy we have, we are using that energy in an efficient way. It is an energy efficient method. Right. For example, in India, we have launched Perform, Achieve, Trade and Ujala LED program. Ujala LED program. So what exactly this Ujala LED program? Now in India, all the street lights are replaced with this Ujala LED. So LED lights, they consume a very less electricity compared to the earlier fluorescent bulbs. So don't you think that this is an energy efficient method? Of course, yes. And the PAT program, Perform, Achieve, Trade. So this is actually a trade scheme with respect to the greenhouse gas emissions or carbon emissions, right? So this is also another scheme. For example, if any industry, if there is any industry, and if this industry is generating, for example, every industry is actually given a certain, for example, this industry should use around like 1 gigawatt of energy or electricity, but this industry has achieved energy efficiency and it has not been using all 1 gigawatt, and the remaining can be converted into units, and those units can be sold in the market to another industry which has exceeded its target. So that is PAT method. So all these programs have helped India so progress rapidly, right? So this is also another achievement, that by September 2025, India has actually achieved a 50% of non-fossil fuel capacity. So that India has planned to achieve. For example, COP26, this is one of the target, but this target was achieved in 2025 itself, right? So that is India's major progress. Now let's understand the renewable energy expansion aspect in India. Now, if you talk about the renewable energy expansion in India, so the installed capacity milestones, if you look at this, the non-fossil fuel capacity increased from 29.5% in 2015 to 51.4%, right? So therefore, we have achieved this target, because non-fossil fuel capacity that we focused by 2030, it should be 50%, but we have already achieved 51.4%. And then solar power, wind power, so they have grown tremendously. We have invested on these things a lot. For example, solar power has grown from 2.8 gigawatt in 2014 to 1111 gigawatt in 2025. Similarly, wind power, 21 gigawatt to 51 gigawatt, right? However, we wanted to reach 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by the year 2030, but still we have to achieve this goal as per the Panchamrut, that we will achieve 500 gigawatt by 2030, but still there is a scope, there is a way that India needs to achieve. And then there are some missed targets as well. So what missed targets? For example, by 2022 the renewable energy target is 175 gigawatt and it was not achieved by 2022. And apart from that, so despite capacity growth, the renewable energies or renewable supplied only 22% of total electricity generation. So these are the missed targets from Indian side. So what are the structural constraints which are involved here? So if we talk about those structural constraints, for example, renewable energy suffers from low capacity factors and intermittency. What exactly is this intermittency? Now intermittency actually means that, understand, if we talk about the intermittency and solar energy generation, so everybody accept the fact that solar energy can be generated in a bright sunny day. What about the monsoon days? What about the winter days? What about at night time? So during night time solar energy cannot be generated. During monsoon days also solar energy cannot be generated. During winter days also, because of low sunlight. So we cannot expect a continuous and a reliable supply of energy from these solar energy resources, and this is what is called as intermittency within solar energy. Now what exactly intermittency in wind energy? Intermittency in wind energy means it actually requires a continuous wind, right? So continuous wind, and the wind should also be to a certain extent that can run the turbines. So however, if there is no wind, no electricity, so therefore we cannot say that it is a reliable supply of energy from solar and wind. So that is the problem. And in fact the capacity is also very less. For example, if you set a wind farm or windmill, so it is not generating energy at an expected level, right? So solar projects are also not generating energy at an expected level. So these are the problems. And however, the coal is actually dominated, right? So coal is still contributing for 70% of the total electricity generation in India. So we all knew that coal, the problem with the coal is that coal is a fossil fuel. Coal is a fossil fuel, and if we excessively use these fossil fuels, then they generate greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases contribute to global warming, and global warming leads to climate change. So that is the problem. So we need to phase out coal gradually. We need to reduce our dependence on coal so that coal will not contribute to environmental pollution and climate change as well, right? However, the coal based capacity remains 253 gigawatt. So, and it is acting as a base load as well. And apart from that, you can also go through the additional details with respect to the energy and emissions in India and the coal dependency, particularly in India, right? So let's understand the forest carbon sink, the targets met, and the ecology questioned, right? So in this context, if we talk about this, now Indian State of Forest Report 2023. So this Indian State of Forest Report 2023 says that the total forest carbon stock, as I've told you that earlier, forests absorb carbon and they store carbon in different parts of the plant. So therefore, as per the Indian State of Forest Report, the total forest carbon stock in India is 30.43 billion tons of CO2 has been absorbed by our forests so far, right? Now, in fact, since 2005, there was an additional sequestration of 2.29 billion tons of CO2 from 2005. So therefore, we have a target. So the target we will achieve, right? So still 0.2% billion tons of CO2 carbon stock or carbon sequestration remaining to meet the 2030 target, to achieve this target set under the COP21 or Paris climate agreement, right? So what are the concerns with respect to the calculation? The concerns is that India's definition of forest include monoculture plantations, orchards, tea gardens, roadside trees, everything, not exact forests. So that is also another problem. So it may give a distorted measurement about the carbon sink. And then, so what are the governance challenges? For example, CAMPA. So CAMPA actually means that compensatory afforestation and fund management, right? So compensatory afforestation and fund management. So this is CAMPA. So in fact, a law has been passed in the year 2016 with respect to CAMPA. So CAMPA Act of 2016, and this CAMPA Act has set up CAMPA Fund. So CAMPA Fund, so if there is any industry which the industry is diverting the forest, for example, there is a new industry and this industry is going to divert the forest. The same amount, so for example, it has been diluting 10 hectares of forest. So if it is diluting 10 hectares of forest, the industry need to provide the amount equivalent to this forest, right? So if it is degrading 10 hectares of forest, this industry need to provide an amount equivalent to this 10 hectares of forest, and this amount will be credited into this CAMPA fund, and later this amount will be utilized for afforestation activity, right? Now in this context, CAMPA 2006, there are around 95,000 crore in this CAMPA fund. It has been accumulated 95,000. But even though there is a 95,000 crore is accumulating in this CAMPA fund, utilization is uneven. For example, Delhi has utilized only 23% of its CAMPA fund. For example, the Green India mission that has been launched for the purpose of afforestation in India, and that has been further revised in 2025. It aims to regenerate 5 million hectares but equates plantations with natural regeneration, right? So climate stress is also another factor. Climate stress in the sense that, for example, global warming, climate change and water stress, they reduce the net primary productivity of the forests. So reducing net primary productivity in places like Western Ghats, Himalayas and northeastern part of India, that further undermines the capacity of forests as a carbon sink or a carbon sequestration of these forests. So these are some of the challenges that we have been facing. However, India is on track, India is on progress to achieve its climate commitments. So still we need to work on afforestation, still we need to work on investing in renewable energy resources, wind energy and solar energy, and we need to phase out the utilization of coal gradually. Right. So I hope you have understood this, and the next important topic is removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. So recently there is a very important news about Justice Yashwant Verma, and a huge amount of burnt cash is found in Justice Yashwant Verma's house. So that led to Justice Yashwant Verma's removal has been initiated in the Parliament. So we'll be understanding everything, how judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are actually being removed, right? So in fact, if we talk about the judicial independence, this judicial independence is a cornerstone of India's constitutional democracy, and this judicial independence is also considered as part of the basic structure doctrine, right? So basic structure doctrine that the Supreme Court has given in Keshwananda Bharti judgment, right? So Keshwananda Bharti judgment of 1973. So judicial independence is part of the basic structure doctrine. Now in this context, so judicial independence, right, so balanced by parliamentary oversight through a rigorous and exceptional process of removal of judges. Now judicial independence is important, but how judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are removed? So that thing that we should understand, the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are removed through a rigorous parliamentary procedure, through which judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are actually removed. Now in India, for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, the grounds are proved misbehavior and incapacity. Proved misbehavior plus incapacity are the grounds for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. Now in fact, in Indian Constitution, there are some articles as well. We'll be discussing those articles with respect to removal of judges and High Court and Supreme Court. But the removal procedure of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court is actually governed under the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. Constitution has just mentioned that there are some articles, through those articles, judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are removed by Parliament, impeached by Parliament. But the detailed procedure has been provided in the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. Now if we talk about the context of it, recently the removal proceedings against Allahabad High Court Judge Justice Yashwant Verma have been initiated in the Parliament, right? So therefore we will be discussing how a judge of the Supreme Court and High Court is actually removed and why it is in use again. Let's understand this, right? So in fact, what happened was, last year, March 2025, a huge amount of half-burnt currency notes were reportedly found in the official residence of Justice Yashwant Verma in his Delhi residence. Right? So once this half-burnt currency notes were found in Justice Yashwant Verma's residence, so there were allegations against him that this amount is an amount that Justice Yashwant Verma earned through corruption. Right? So therefore there were serious allegations, and these serious allegations raised concerns regarding judicial integrity and propriety, so which actually fall under the constitutional grounds of proved misbehavior. Now as I've told you that the grounds for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are proved misbehavior and incapacity. So these are the actual grounds for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. However, what was the Parliament response? The Parliament response was in July 2025. So over 140 members of the Parliament from Lok Sabha submitted a notice of motion seeking Justice Yashwant Verma's removal. Now I'll tell you why members of the Parliament have submitted the notice of motion for the removal of Justice Yashwant Verma submitted, because this is actually the part of the procedure for the removal of judges as per the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. Right? So apart from this, in Lok Sabha, removal motion has been initiated by around 140 members. So a separate notice of motion was also submitted in Rajya Sabha on the very same day, July 21st, 2025. So two notices of motion have been submitted in both Lok Sabha plus Rajya Sabha for the removal of the Justice Yashwant Verma. Right. Now immediately, so I'll tell you what exactly is the procedure. So the procedure is that, under the Judges Enquiry Act 1968, so Constitution has mentioned that there are two grounds for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court: proved misbehavior and incapacity. Right? So if any judge to be removed, who can remove them? So President can remove them after Parliament has recommended the President to remove the judge of Supreme Court and High Court. Now how Parliament can start this process of removal of judge? This process or procedure has been mentioned in the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. Right. Now in this, if a removal motion is introduced in Lok Sabha, 100 members from Lok Sabha 100 members from Lok Sabha need to submit a notice of motion, notice motion to Speaker of the Lok Sabha if it is initiated in Lok Sabha first, right? However, if it is initiated in Rajya Sabha first, 50 members of because Lok Sabha members Lok Sabha has around 550 members and Rajya Sabha has around 250 members. So that's why in Rajya Sabha 50 members are sufficient because it is its members are less. So 50 members need to submit a motion for the removal of the Judge of Supreme Court and High Court to the Chairman of Rajya Sabha. Right. So it is not necessary to submit the motion in both houses, but any house can take up this motion. It can be taken up by Rajya Sabha or it can be taken up by Lok Sabha also. For example, in this case, if Lok Sabha has taken up this motion, the Speaker may accept this motion or reject the motion. If Speaker reject the motion will end. If Speaker accepts this motion, then Speaker will constitute a 3-member committee. Right, Speaker will constitute a 3-member committee. Now, when this motion has been adopted in a motion has been passed in Lok Sabha by 100 members, so in this case 140 members, Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla constituted a 3-member committee. As per the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. Now, this 3-member committee consisting of a judge of a Supreme Court, secondly Chief Justice of a High Court, and then a distinguished jurist. So in a similar way, he also constituted a 3-member committee with the judge of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of a High Court, and a senior advocate who is a distinguished jurist. Now, what legal controversy has came into existence here? So Justice Yashwant Verma actually challenged Speaker's action, arguing that Section 3, Clause 2, Provision 1 of the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968, when motions are submitted to both houses on same day, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. Remember, I've told you that it is not necessary to submit these motions for both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. So it can be introduced in either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. There is no bar. But with respect to Justice Yashwant Verma's case, this motion has been introduced or submitted in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha on same day. So therefore, he has been arguing that this enquiry committee must be constituted jointly by Lok Sabha Speaker and Rajya Sabha Chairman. So they have to constitute together, but not alone as a Lok Sabha. But because since Rajya Sabha notice was rejected by the Deputy Chairman. Now when this motion has been introduced in Rajya Sabha, Deputy Chairman actually rejected this motion. So if Deputy Chairman rejected this motion will end here. But in Lok Sabha, it has been accepted by the Speaker. So therefore, it will continue. So therefore, here Justice Yashwant Verma's contention is that since Rajya Sabha has rejected this motion, so this removal procedure will end on this particular point of time. Lok Sabha Speaker should not constitute a committee. Right, so this is his contention. So what Supreme Court's view on this? The Supreme Court's view on this is that Supreme Court has prima facie disregarded Justice Yashwant Verma's contention. Why? Because there is no express statutory bar which can prevent Speaker from constituting a committee once Rajya Sabha's motion is rejected. So Rajya Sabha's motion is rejected. That doesn't mean that Lok Sabha Speaker cannot constitute a committee. So Lok Sabha Speaker can constitute a committee as per the Judges Enquiry Act of 1968. And secondly, if the chairman's office is vacant in Rajya Sabha, Deputy Chairman may step in and ensure institutional continuity. And court has indicated that the procedural objections cannot defeat the accountability mechanisms in this Justice Yashwant Verma's case. Now you can see here he is Justice Yashwant Verma and the burnt cash that you could also see in this image, right? So what are the articles? For example, Article 124 Clause 4, it talks about the removal of Supreme Court judges. Now Article 207 Clause 1 Subclause B, it talks about the removal of High Court judges. These are two important articles. right? So what are the grounds? The grounds of proved misbehavior and incapacity. These are the only grounds for the removal of judges of the Supreme Court and High Court, right? So removal actually requires special majority in both houses of the parliament, both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. And then once it is passed with the special majority, it will be addressed to the president. Then president will issue a removal order. So what exactly is the special majority in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha? Special majority actually means that 50 members of more than 50% of total strength of the house need to approve this. Total strength of house must approve this, and more than 2/3 of members present and voting. Members present and voting is the special majority that is actually required in both Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, right? So that's how judges are being removed by president on the recommendation of parliament, right? So Judges Inquiry Act 1968 has actually provided a detailed procedure for the removal of judges, right? So firstly, in order to remove a judge of a Supreme Court and a High Court, a motion has to be introduced either in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. Not necessary it has to be introduced in both houses. It can be introduced in either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. So in this case, we assume that a motion for the removal of High Court judge has been introduced in Lok Sabha. But this motion must be introduced in Lok Sabha. In Lok Sabha, at least 100 members must support this. 100 members must sign in this motion. But in case of Rajya Sabha, if it is introduced in Rajya Sabha, 50 members of Rajya Sabha must sign this motion. So once 100 members are supported this motion, it will be presented to the Speaker of Lok Sabha in case of Lok Sabha, and if it is presented to the chairman in case of Rajya Sabha. Now in this case, Speaker has two options. He can either accept this motion or reject the motion. So if he reject the motion, this motion will end at that point of time. If he accept it, he will constitute a 3-member committee, right? Now, so you just completely ignore Rajya Sabha here. So if he if he constitutes a 3-member committee, as I've already told you, this 3-member committee will constitute judge of a Supreme Court, Chief Justice of a High Court, and a distinguished jurist. So this 3-member committee prove that the concerned judge is guilty, that he has committed the offense under proved misbehavior and incapacity. If the committee proved that, then Lok Sabha will take up this motion for voting. Right, so the Lok Sabha will take up this motion for voting. However, if this 3-member committee has proved that this judge is not guilty of proved misbehavior and incapacity, then this motion will end at that point of time. However, if this committee find that this judge is guilty, then Lok Sabha will take up this for voting, and this has to be passed with the special majority. I've told you what exactly is a special majority. Special majority is, so more than 50% of total strength of the house, then 2/3 of the members present and voting. So that is the special majority. So once it is passed with the special majority in Lok Sabha, then it will be sent to Rajya Sabha. And Rajya Sabha, there will be no 3-member committee in Rajya Sabha, because 3-member committee is already constituted in Lok Sabha. So Rajya Sabha will just take up for voting. And in Rajya Sabha also, it requires a special majority. Once it gets the special majority, then Parliament will recommend President to remove the concerned judge. So this is the procedure. However, if it is introduced, if this motion is introduced in Rajya Sabha, 50 members must sign it, and then 50 members must sign it, and it will be submitted to chairman, and chairman either accept it or reject it. So if he accepts this, he will constitute a 3-member committee. If he reject this, the procedure will end at that point of time, right? So again, he will constitute this 3-member committee, and after 3-member committee finds him guilty, then it will be taken up for voting, and it requires special majority in Rajya Sabha. So once it gets special majority in Rajya Sabha, then it will be sent to Lok Sabha. So Lok Sabha, there will be no need for 3-member committee, because it has already been conducted by Rajya Sabha. So if Lok Sabha constituted a 3-member committee, there will be no need for Rajya Sabha to constitute a 3-member committee. If Rajya Sabha constituted a 3-member committee, there will be no need for Lok Sabha to constitute this 3-member committee. So this is how judges of the Supreme Court and High Court are actually being removed. So they are ultimately removed by the president. For example, there are some examples as well. For example, V. Ramaswamy case in 1993. So he was the first impeachment motion against the Supreme Court judge. However, the inquiry committee has found him guilty of financial impropriety. This comes under the proved misbehavior from the judge. However, this motion was failed in Lok Sabha due to abstentions, highlighting the political nature of the process. However, this motion was passed in Rajya Sabha. Right? So this is, I also understand so far no Supreme Court judge, no High Court judge has been removed through this process. No Supreme Court, after India's independence, no Supreme Court judge and no High Court judge has been removed through this process. So therefore, you can imagine how difficult and how complicated this procedure to remove the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. So that's all for today, and thank you so much.